Well, hello and welcome. I see so many familiar faces out there. It's great to have you here at McKesson Idea Share 2024 in New Orleans. Thanks to all of you so much for joining in and listening to us today. My name is Suzanne Feeney, and I'm one of your VPs of Pharmacy Retail Operations. I support the Midwest states as a pharmacist, really helping independent pharmacies and their teams be able to be successful. I'm thrilled today to have Scott Mooney with me, and I'll be your host, interviewing and asking him a few of the top questions regarding DSCSA. So if you remember McKesson Idea Share last year, it was a very hot topic of conversation, and there's still quite a bit going on with it right now. So we want to give you all that you need to really stay up to speed in the ever-changing climate. So just a little bit of background, the Drug Supply Chain Security Act, or DSCSA, has been around for quite some time. Scott, you've been talking about it for over 10 years now.
Over 10 years, yep.
Over 10 years, yes. So it was signed into law in 2013. So we are currently in the stabilization period. So all of you have heard, I know, quite a bit about this, but what DSCSA does is really outlines the steps to achieve interoperable electronic tracing of products at the package level, which has been new for pharmacy. So something we've been talking about for over a decade, but really new for pharmacy. We found out last year that we entered the stabilization period. So I know I've been getting quite a few questions from independent pharmacies, not only about DSCSA, about the stabilization period, and then also about this new exemption that has come out.
Came out last week.
Came out just last week, hot off the press. So we are fortunate to have Scott with us. He is an industry lead on this, has wrote the law, has been involved in this for decades, and really knows it inside and out. So I'm going to stop talking now and really turn it over to Scott to give us the latest details. We will get to that exemption letter, but first, Scott, can you just tell us a little bit about the stabilization period that we're in right now?
Sure. We're approaching the end, Suzanne, of the DSCSA implementation. It was originally a 10-year evolutionary process, starting with rudimentary traceability, and along the way, with the package markings had to change to incorporate more robust information. And at the end of this, which was expected originally to be November of 2023, we were going to be expected to use the serial numbers, the lot numbers, and the expiration dates in those new barcodes in all of our transactions. Last summer, we were given an additional 12 months to stabilize the systems and processes. As the FDA put it, it was to perfect and mature your systems for DSCSA before they were going to hold industry accountable to use the serial numbers and transactions. So here we are in the summer of 2024 now. We've been in stabilization for about 6 or 7 months at this particular point in time, and the stabilization period expires November 27th of this year. For the industry, by the end of this year, by November 27th, every transaction from a manufacturer to a distributor or to a dispenser from the manufacturer is expected to have DSCSA serialized data being exchanged in an interoperable electronic manner. Distributors have requirements going in this year as well for DSCSA. So at McKesson, we've been working very hard to be ready for that, to be able to pass DSCSA data to our customers regarding how they want to receive it, whether it's through a portal or as a push. But the stabilization period has been largely about using the system kind of in a no-harm manner. Penalties will begin to attach at the end of November this year as we move into the next phase, which is full go-live for the industry.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is we have the summer. This is going to go into effect in November. So from my perspective, talking to independents out there, you have this time right now to be in the stabilization where there's not penalty and you can still get your pharmacy up to speed and ready. I know that there's a lot that we've been talking to independents about. One of the things I mentioned on store visits that I have is making sure you have your policies and procedures in place. And McKesson has quite a few resources. So can you talk about what independents can do between now and the end of November to prepare?
Sure. So some of the things the DSCSA requires are not new. Some of the things have been there since 2014, but have been floating a little bit under the radar. So sometimes people haven't recognized that they have to do it. But every pharmacy should have a policy or an SOP guide for what they're going to do should they encounter a suspect or illegitimate product. This should detail what their investigation would look like, what the manner in which they're going to check it out would be. That might include looking at your transaction information that you got when you purchased the product. It may include reaching out to the manufacturer to ask, did you make this particular bottle that I'm looking at, to help answer the questions of, is this a legitimate product or is this an illegitimate product? So everybody needs to have that SOP. There's model language available if people are looking for it. NCPA has a draft model policy out on their website. It would be great for a pharmacy that doesn't know where to go to look at and customize to do their own thing with. But the important part with an SOP is it's not enough to have it, but you have to follow it.
Exactly.
If you say in your SOP that when I find a suspect product, I'm going to put it on the red shelf, be sure that every time you find a suspect product, you can document I put it on the red shelf.
And that you have a red shelf, right?
And have a red shelf, yes, because the agencies are going to inspect you against this SOP, and they're going to be very concerned about, do you follow what you say you're going to do? They'll actually be less concerned about what you said you were going to do and more concerned about, did you follow what you said your process was? In addition to that, you should only be buying drugs from authorized trading partners, and McKesson is an authorized trading partner, as are others. But authorized means that we're appropriately licensed by the state that we operate in and that we register with the FDA to report our licensing activity. So those are kind of the early things that pharmacies had to do. Be on the lookout for suspicious drugs, have a policy. Serialization is going to introduce some additional requirements. And serialization is going to kind of carry it out to the final point where we'll be able to uniquely define the difference between this cup and the cup that you have as being same product, same NDC number, same lot number potentially, but this is number 1 and yours is number 2. And that's a large part of where we're going next with the evolution, is to be able to get down to that granular level. Not only to know, did you buy a particular product, but which exact bottle was sold to you in that process. And that's what's coming up here in 2024.
Okay, that makes sense. So a couple of things I heard you say: have your policy, which a plug for Health Mart pharmacies. They do have access to templated policies through My Health Mart.
The My Health Mart has another great resource. I'm sorry I didn't mention that earlier.
That's okay. You gave me the opportunity to bring it up,
Okay.
so that was perfect. And NCPA as well. So if it were me, I'm looking at all of those resources and then making sure that your team, everyone on your staff knows what to do if they're asked questions about suspect products. So there's some education to the team.
Yep.
Well, go ahead.
And another resource to call out would be McKesson Connect. There is a DSCSA page in McKesson Connect. I apologize to the listeners because it's full of videos of me talking to them about DSCSA, but there are, I believe, 5 or 6 videos out there. They're little 15-minute snippets. What's a global location number? Why do I need one? Where will I find my DSCSA data? What changes can I expect with 2023, now deferred through the stabilization to 2024, et cetera. There's a whole bunch of topical materials. There's a bunch of written materials out there as well. So it's a great resource.
I actually love that resource so much. It's on Connect. If you go on the left-hand side, you click DSCSA. And like you said, it's quick 15-minute videos. So they're things that you can watch. It's really separated very nicely on the different topics. One of the questions I get all the time is, what's this traceability data? Where do I find it? And I point people to it all the time.
Yeah. If you recall last year at IdeaShare, we did a big stage presentation, and it had an hour.
Yes.
And it was too much content to make in a portable version that people could use when they went back to their pharmacy.
Yeah.
It's hard to get people to step away from the pharmacy counter. So we tried to structure all of this material into stuff you can consume in little snippets, perhaps as you take a break in the afternoon. Maybe you sit down for a sandwich at lunch. Something like that to make it easy for somebody in a pharmacy to do.
It really is easy. Nicely done. And there's some nice picture graphs on there that I can pull up and just kind of refresh myself. So I do appreciate that. It's definitely been done with a busy pharmacist in mind. So thanks for that.
Great.
Okay, so on to the latest and greatest. I think this exemption. So I'm getting lots of questions. What's this announcement? What's this exemption? Do I have to pay attention anymore? Have I been given an out? So can you give us the details on what independents need to know?
Sure. So a week ago this past Thursday, the FDA dropped what they're calling a small business exemption into the DSCSA space. Now, this is different than previous actions the agency's taken. It's not stabilization period with more time for everybody. It's not an extension of the deadlines for everybody, but it is targeted at dispensers who have less than 25 full-time pharmacists and pharmacy technicians.
So 25 full-time staff members.
Pharmacists and technicians.
Pharmacists and technicians. That's a key distinction.
Doesn't count your front team that's working up in your OTC sections. It's just the people dealing with prescriptions. What the FDA has basically said is there's several specific provisions. It's not a complete deferral, but what they've done is they said that for the next 24 months after November, so until November of 2026, those pharmacies that meet that small business exemption with 25 or fewer pharmacists and technicians do not need to receive and reconcile their DSCSA transaction data at the serial number level until November of 26. They also don't need to use the serial numbers in the course of their suspect product investigations or in verifying product until November of 2026. But it is limited just to those small entities. So anybody like McKesson who's supplying that particular business still has all of their DSCSA obligations coming up live this year. So McKesson still has to prepare, create, and make available all of the DSCSA serialized data for those small businesses, even if that small business does not have to utilize that data themselves for another 24 months. So we still have our obligations. We still have to capture that data. We will be posting it all to McKesson Connect. If somebody has hired on a solution provider, we'll continue to post it out to the solution providers. Now, granted, we're just starting to push some of that data out at this point. We've been focused heavily on the manufacturers, but more and more data is starting to flow out to the dispensers at this time.
That's great. That's great. So if I'm an owner, I'm breathing a little bit of a sigh of relief, not because I'm getting out of doing anything or because I shouldn't prepare, but it gives me a bit more time to just make sure I'm comfortable with these changes, that my staff is ready, that I'm receiving all the information in kind of a safe zone. Is that a fair assessment?
I think it is partially fair,
Okay.
but don't over-assume what this does and doesn't mean. So I mentioned earlier that distributors still have their obligations to capture data, create the data, and to utilize the data. So while the pharmacy doesn't have an obligation anymore to do receiving against the data on November 28th of this year, they have 2 years to do that. Distributors will, by November, McKesson included, have to begin enforcing the new saleable returns rules. And that's a bit of a challenge because in many cases, I think pharmacies may presume that I'm not doing DSCSA because I've got a 2-year period, but recognize that the distributor's requirement to what they have to do to validate a serialized return still goes into effect this year. So as product comes back to us, we're going to be required to scan the serial number on the physical package that's returned, and we're going to be required to only accept that product from the party that purchased it from us.
Okay.
So we'll look at the data when we sold it, say, I sold Suzanne serial number 1. Suzanne, when you return the bottle, if you send us back serial number 1, we're required to scan that and make sure, yes, I can validate that Suzanne bought serial number 1.
Okay.
If you happen to send us back serial number 2, we're required by law to reject serial number 2 because there was no record that Suzanne bought serial number 2. Even though you physically have it in your hands, there's no record.
That makes sense. Okay. So there's still some things that we need to consider within this exemption period as we move on from stabilization, especially with returns. For the exemption, anything that pharmacies need to do to be exempt or to prove their staff, or are they just enough to know, hey, I have 25 or less technicians and pharmacies, so I'm okay, no paperwork?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And the FDA had actually encouraged people who met that definition to notify your trading partner that you qualify for the small business exemption.
Okay.
As we look at it, though, from McKesson's perspective, since our requirement is still to capture all the data and publish all the data and make use of all the data, it really doesn't matter to us. We should be careful with that.
Yeah.
It matters to us that the dispensers got relief.
Sure.
It doesn't operationally change our processes because we have to do all the same things regardless. So we don't have a flag in the system where we're going to ask you to tell us how many technicians and pharmacists you have and we turn something on or off.
Sure.
We're going to do the same thing we would do anyways because we're required to have the data in our own purposes.
Okay.
It's just that when we post the data, you may not have to log in and look at it.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Okay, so it seems like this is something that everybody should be aware of, understand, and gives them a bit more time as long as they're preparing for this and understand the return and some of the different nuance. And I'm sure there's a ton of information online and that there will be some information on the exemption on Connect or...
Yeah, this is fairly late breaking. It came out a week ago Thursday. Last week I was in Washington, D.C. with the FDA Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday trying to dig into this one a little bit more. I was somewhat optimistic that maybe this was the first document they dropped and there were a few more coming for the rest of the industry, but there were not.
There were not? Okay.
I was told in no uncertain terms that's all that's coming. That's all the FDA is going to do. So if you're a small business, be grateful you got it. If you're not a small business, I'm sorry, the deadline's November 27th.
Yeah, and use these last few months wisely.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, I appreciate all that information. Anything else that some of the small dispensaries should consider with the exemption or moving forward?
Yeah, I want to touch briefly. I hit on this a little bit at Idea Share last year and created a lot of interest and discussion to the point where when I got back to my booth, and I have a booth here again this year.
You were a hot topic last year,
If you remember last year, some of you, I was getting pretty exhausted by the end of the thing, so I had a stool. They had brought me a stool already, so I have
Yeah,
one
you
over
had
the
a
booth
crowd
now.
around you at all
Yeah,
times.
we'll be doing the same thing again this year, but
Okay.
this notion that we have to confirm that the party that's returning the product is the party that bought the product
Uh-huh.
has a particular inference or nuance for people who do 340B.
Yes.
The FDA was asked about 340B a couple of years ago, and they published a document in response to requests from the trade associations, NACDS, NCPA, APHA, and others about how does DSCSA affect 340B product.
Yeah.
And in that document, the FDA clearly states that the 340B product is sold to the health system,
Okay.
even though it may be delivered to a retail pharmacy, to a community pharmacy. That the ownership of the product belongs to the health system. And the impact of that, though, now that we're coming up on November 27th of 2024, is when the stabilization period expires and we begin testing saleable returns, only the covered entity has the authority or the ability to return a product that was purchased on 340B.
Okay.
If it was purchased on 340B, the FDA has said that was not sold to the retail pharmacy. It was sold and billed to the covered entity, and that's the only party that can make a saleable return for it. So I think there's some dynamics that if you're a small business, you're any pharmacy that's doing 340B, you have to think about a little bit differently, because you're not going to be able to pull that bottle off your shelf and send it back for credit.
Yeah.
It's going to get denied to you because you didn't purchase it.
Yes. Yes. So that's something that's really important to be aware
It's
of.
important. It's not a happy note.
Yeah.
It's a significant issue, but the agency kind of took the approach of that's exactly the way the HRSA rules work for 340B as far as who's eligible for the pricing. They've applied that, and it may mean that you have to rethink your financial model with the covered entities that you're dealing with.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Okay. Well, we very much appreciate your time today and talking through DSCSA, the stabilization period, McKesson resources, as well as this exemption. And I know there will be many more questions for you. So you'll be at your booth during exhibit hours today, also tomorrow, and available for people to maybe dig into a bit more detail.
Yep.
But thank you so much. I mean, it's always a pleasure.
Well, thank you for having me.
Having you talk about this. I never thought DSCSA would be something I could listen to so frequently, but you do such a great job of explaining it and making it really easy for us. So thanks for that.
Okay, thank you. Stop by, ask questions if you have any. I'll be happy to entertain them.
Awesome. Amazing.
Right.
Amazing. Well, Scott, thank you so much. Listeners, I know I took a lot away from that, and I hope you did all well. Thanks so much for listening live from New Orleans at McKesson IdeaShare 2024 radio broadcast. We'll see you next time.